Hi, thank you for joining me today. I'm Janet Silverman. I'm a research team manager at Ancestry Progenealogists, and my team and I specialize in Eastern European and Jewish research. As such, we often find ourselves immersed in research dealing with the dark days of the period during World War II that we call the Holocaust. It's also known as Shoah in Hebrew, and I'll be referring to the documents, to the research as Holocaust or Shoah era research. I should like someone to remember that there once lived a person named David Berger. I never knew David. This is a quote from the Yad Vashem website. Yad Vashem is the Holocaust memorial in Israel. And the reason that I feel drawn to this quote above so many others is because so much of what I do, so much of what my team does, is to try to restore memories. We try to reconnect people with those who were lost either because they were murdered in the Holocaust or because what happened during the Holocaust disrupted their knowledge today of their family in Europe, the family before they emigrated from Eastern Europe. Jewish research is very difficult because of a lot of lack of records or finding the records. Sometimes the records are there, but we just don't know where to look for them. Today, we're going to not be addressing all of the issues of Jewish research. That's something for another day, another time, maybe a whole week, month, or year of study. Certainly, people spend that amount of time digging into the records and the challenges that's posed by doing Jewish research. But today we're going to take a look at some challenges of doing Holocaust era research. We're going to look at some historical background of Eastern Europe. We're going to talk about overcoming some of the challenges and where to look for the records. Now, of course, a main challenge is figuring out what you don't know. That sometimes can be overwhelming. I was really naive in the beginning of my research. What did I know? Well, I knew when my ancestors left Europe and where they went. My grandfather, Harry Silverman, came to the US in 1920. He was 17 years old. I know who his siblings were. His parents, Moshe Silverman and Pearl Buchbinder, had 12 children. 3 of them died in infancy, and the rest came to the US. They were in Suceava in the Bukovina province of Romania. How did I know what I knew? Well, family stories. I knew my grandfather fairly well, and a receipt of his transportation from Europe to the US in 1920, among other documents. Well, what didn't I know? I didn't know anything else, everything else. I didn't even know the questions I ought to be asking. I didn't know what there was possibly to be found or where to look to find it. My grandfather died in 1986, and a couple of years before he died, he asked me a question. He asked me if I could find out who this Goldenzweig family was. He handed me an envelope. You see the front and the back of the envelope here. The envelope was sent to Pearl Silverman in Suceava, Bukovina, Romania. It was postmarked from Montreal in August 1927. It arrived in September 1927. He had no information at all about the Goldenzweig family except for their name. They were in Montreal, that's where it was postmarked. The return address on the back of the envelope says Canada, Province Quebec, PQ. He didn't know why this person or these people were writing to his mother Pearl, but he asked me to find out. And back in the day when he asked me, I could not even imagine being able to find them or what I needed to do besides trying to find the family in a phone book. And of course, 1927, 1986, it's 60 years later, Pearl was in her 40s or older by that time, by 1927. And I told him that I'd do what I could. The letter inside the envelope didn't give us much help. It was in a language that nobody could figure out. My grandfather had no idea what language it was. They lived in Romania, so I asked some people who translate Romanian. They said it wasn't Romanian, and it wasn't German, and it wasn't Russian, and it wasn't Polish, and it wasn't Yiddish. So the letter sat there. Every once in a while, I would take it out. And then I started recognizing some words, random words in there. And we ultimately discovered that the letter was written in a mix of German and Yiddish. And because of that discovery, we were able to get it translated. Several different people worked on the translation. And the reason I'm bringing it up here is because we discovered the relationship of the Goldenzweig family to the Silverman family, and it was really shocking. It was shocking because of how quickly the connection between Pearl Silverman and Bryna Goldenzweig disappeared in the memory of living people. Bryna was Pearl's sister. She left Europe in about 1901 or 1902. Harry, my grandfather, was born in 1903. He never met her, and there's a good chance that his mother only referred to her sister, maybe her sister living in Canada, maybe her sister who had left so long ago, but never referred to her by name. And so my grandfather couldn't relate to the last name Goldenzweig. Bryna died, as you can see on her gravestone, in 1929. Pearl arrived in the US in 1928. I don't think that Pearl and Bryna were ever in contact again. So that's how fast knowledge of people can disappear. And they were in North America. There was no war disrupting their lives. Let's take a look at some of the background. By the 1880s, Galicia in the Austrian Empire and the Pale of Settlement in the Russian Empire housed over 75% of all the Jews living worldwide. Galicia and the Pale of Settlement were formed between 1772 and 1795 during the dissolution of the very large Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. During that period, it was partitioned 3 times to the Austrian Empire, Russian Empire, and Prussia. And Galicia and the Pale of Settlement were 2 of the areas that were ceded to the Austrian Empire and the Russian Empire and developed further by those ruling powers. Beginning in the 1880s, worsening economic and political conditions in both Galicia and the Pale of Settlement, and rumors of better economic opportunities and less anti-Semitism, caused massive upheavals and the desire of families to emigrate, to leave those areas in Eastern Europe. And they did in droves, and they resettled worldwide, all over North America, South America, Australia, South Africa, any place they could get to. During the interwar period between World War I and World War II, there was increased emigration from Eastern Europe until abruptly in 1939, when the incursion of the Nazi army caused that to come to not an abrupt halt, but certainly a trickle. So it went from a flood of immigration to a trickle. during the war and after the war, you had people from all over Europe searching for visas to leave, to go someplace else, someplace safe. This particularly affected the Jewish community, whose movements were restricted. Anybody helping them to escape stood in danger of being incarcerated themselves in concentration camps or even being shot immediately. The Kinder transport, children's transport, brought about 10,000 children from Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland to Great Britain. About 3/4 of these children were Jewish, and a lot of these children wound up in Canada. Jews were looking for safe harbors, so were other people. The Holocaust in Europe did not just affect the Jewish community, it was something that affected a lot of other communities, including other minorities, political dissidents, artists, all sorts of people of various nationalities. After the war, there was a huge population of displaced persons. And these people were sometimes housed in displaced persons camps, and sometimes they were able to restart their lives by going back to their original communities. Research into the era is often results in finding documents with unbearable sadness. There are days when I do nothing but stare at records crying. But there are also joyful discoveries to find, people who survived, finding details about their lives and what they did to recreate their lives. So I want to go over some of the various databases this afternoon, and I want to show you some of the records and some of the ways to find records. The first documents I found were on microfilm, and it was in 1996. I was in Israel at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Center in Israel, in Jerusalem, and I found this record for Norbert Silberman. Norbert was my grandfather's brother. He was the only one of my grandfather's siblings who did not leave Europe. My grandfather told us a story about Norbert, and that story said that Norbert had, that one of Norbert's daughters had been captured and sent to a concentration camp, and Norbert went to see if he could manage to bribe somebody and release her. So he found a friendly guard, and he spoke to the guard, and he offered the guard some money, gave him some at that point, and he was due to come back shortly afterwards with the rest. The family story says that Norbert went back and the guard wasn't there. There was another guard, and he paid the guard, and he was shot and killed. Well, that's not what this record told me. What this record told me was that Norbert was actually incarcerated in Mauthausen for a period of time. I don't know what period of time. And he was killed in Mauthausen. When I looked further into the records, I discovered that he was killed escaping. But this was the first time I'd ever seen a record from that time period. I had spent probably 6 or 8 hours researching, looking through countless images on microfilm and microfiche that day, looking for, I don't know who, certainly looking for somebody with a familiar name, not figuring that I was actually going to find people. The most people I knew that had been killed during the Holocaust were my grandmother's siblings, who were shot in the street. And I didn't know if any of them had managed to escape. So I suppose I may have been looking for records of them after the Holocaust. At the time that I found this record, I had no idea what those cryptic 3 letters at the bottom of the record that's in white on your screen. It says ITS Master Index. I had no idea what the ITS was or what a master index was. The letters ITS, I now know, stand for International Tracing Service. In 1943, a tracing bureau was formed under the auspices of the British Red Cross. Its purpose was to trace and register missing persons. To that end, it began collecting documents held by the Nazis, including information from orphanages, hospitals, concentration camps, and refugee camps. The files the ITS held ultimately contained information on nearly 18 million people from concentration camps or who were refugees after the war. The material is not comprehensive. There's little information in these records, for example, about the people murdered in the streets in Eastern Europe by the Einsatzgruppen, like my grandmother's family. The founding of the ITS was not intended specifically to aid Jewish families that were split up during the war. People of all nationalities had their families' lives disrupted during the war, and there were a lot of people throughout Europe looking for family members. The ITS was also not intended to become an archive. Its primary purpose at its inception was that of a tracing service, international tracing service. Although the ITS was not open to the public, its employees responded to written requests for information about missing people. It morphed into an archive as the need for tracing missing people diminished. After the war in 1955, the ITS came under the umbrella of a coalition of 11 nations and was administered by the International Committee of the Red Cross. The governance of the ITS by the Red Cross ceased in 2012. At that time, the German Federal Archive took over its administration. Since 1956, Yad Vashem held much material from the ITS archives, such as the records I searched for in 1996. Beginning in 2007, digitized ITS holdings were released to organizations in each of the 11 countries responsible for the archives. Some of the databases can now be searched online through the website of many of the repositories. More research can be done in person or through submission of written requests to one of the repositories. In April 2019, the name of the ITS was changed to the Arolsen Archives International Center on Nazi Persecution. That's just about a year ago. The name change emphasizes the archive's new goals. The Arolsen Archives will offer the public projects, exhibitions, and education on the consequences of anti-Semitism, discrimination, and racism, in addition to continuing to make available the collection of documents from concentration camps and ghettos. About 8 years ago, I was speaking with Zvi Bernhardt, who was then the Deputy Director of Reference and Information Services and the Deputy Director of the Hall of Names at Yad Vashem. He told me the Nazis didn't write down names and information about all the people murdered in the camps. He said that records were created at deportation points of Western Europeans and also of people who lived for a short period in the camp. Records such as the ones I found for Norbert only existed when the person to whom the records referred was actually admitted to the camp. If a person was murdered immediately, no record was created, and that person's name would never appear on any camp record. Zvi told me that 85% of the people who arrived at Auschwitz were murdered within a day of their arrival, and their names were never recorded anywhere. What we know from this record was that Norbert was not murdered outside the camp, as Harry's story indicated, but in the camp. Now, I want to just mention that Zvi died very suddenly in late April, and I'm really glad to be able to mention his name here and to remember him. He did amazing, amazing work. I want to show you what the collection looked like that I found this record from now. This is what's available now online by searching through the Arolsen archives. And you can see that there's 545 images just in this data set, which includes some maps as well as records. These aren't just records for Harry, but for Norbert, Harry's brother, but these are records from a lot of different camps You can see from this list, this is the piece of the list that, the part of the file that I'm looking at right now from the concentration camp Mauthausen. Now, there were records that were hidden from view a few years ago that had me banging my head against the wall looking for, that now are pretty easy to find online. So these records are for the family of a friend, Ruth Ebner. Ruth was born in a displaced persons camp, and she knew her birth date in 1949, or 1948, sorry, but she had no idea when the family arrived in the US. The only thing she knew was that she was in the US by the 1950 birth of her brother. She didn't know how she and her parents arrived in the US, nor did she know when, nor where she was born. She asked me to see if I could find the records. Through inquiries posed to the US Holocaust Memorial Museum and Yad Vashem, I received the records on this screen. One was a record for her mother, Helena Ebner, and the other is part of a ship manifest. The record for Helena on the left, the small index card, says that on March 3rd, 1949, Helena emigrated to the US on the SS Marine Jumper. The record on the right is the page from the SS Marine Jumper that shows Helen, her husband Alexander, and their daughter Ruth's arrival in the US. In column 13, you can see that they were being sponsored by Jacob Kempler, and we knew what his relationship to the Ebner family was. We knew that Alexander was a farmer, Ruth was a housewife, Helena was a housewife, and Ruth was a child, of course. Ruth was born in Germany. She was 18 months old on March 3rd, 1949. And she was born in Germany while her parents were born in Poland. When I wanted to get the rest of this ship manifest, I was told that it was unavailable because of contractual arrangements with what was then the ITS. Only pages of documents that pertained to a specific inquiry could be provided. Anything else would need to be searched on site. In other words, I would have to go to one of the repositories that were holding these records. They couldn't just email me copies of the entire manifest the way they were able to email me this page. So today, it's so much easier to find this. Through a cooperative venture of Ancestry and the Arolsen archives, this manifest, along with other manifests of displaced persons going all over the world, can be researched online. And you can see the result of a search on Ancestry. And you can see this label here, Arolsen Archives, that shows that this is part of the cooperative venture between the two. You can see that the source citation at the bottom tells you it's from the Arolsen Archives, which is located in Bad Arolsen, Germany, and the data sets that it came from. Now, as I said, this was from an Africa, Asia, and Europe passenger list of displaced persons. That was the data set that those records came from. And it consists of passenger lists of immigrants leaving Germany and other European ports and airports between 1946 and 1971. Although the majority of immigrants listed in the collection are Holocaust survivors, former concentration camp inmates, and Nazi forced laborers. There's also refugees from Central and Eastern European countries and non-European countries. This record, these records are part of the file from the AEF, the Allied Expeditionary Forces of Displaced Person Registration Records. And these also are from the Arolsen archives. You can see here one of the records that's part of a search for Ruth's family. And this is from her mother, whose last name is Ebner, but she was born as Volrach. And her husband is Alexander, her daughter's Ruth. And it's got the place of each of their births, which for Ruth was really important. That answered part of Ruth's questions about where she was born and when the family came to the US. Now, the US, of course, isn't the only place that refugees came to. They went all over North America, and Canada was a big destination. There are records from many ships of people heading for Canada. This particular record is for Simon Annisman, and he was departing from Bremen, Germany on November 15th, 1950. He was going to Canada. And this again is from the Arolsen archives. And this is what the record looks like, both in its entirety and the transcription. So this is the transcription that the index is created from, and this is what the full page of the record looks like. And it says that this is people departing from a resettlement center, and it's a US zone in Germany. And it's divided into different areas in the zone. And this ship was, as I said, going to Canada. You can see that the people are from various countries. These are their countries of citizenship: Romania, Poland, Latvia, Hungary. These are the religions. So Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Greek Catholic, Jewish, Evangelical. A lot of information here: the place and country of birth, their occupation. I wanted to show you this particular ship manifest because, as I said, ships left from all over the world going to all over the world. This particular ship, the SS Adabel Likes, left from Shanghai, China in November 1945, and it was bound for the US. There may have been ships that left from Shanghai that were also bound for Canada, that were going to Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, just about any place in the world. These were primarily refugees. You can see here that although they were leaving from Shanghai, the last permanent address, they were of a lot of different nationalities. And they've got here both the nationality, and here's a Canadian here, Witter Atkinson. And all of these people, though, were in Shanghai for whatever reason. Either they were there for the duration of the war, or they fled there immediately following the war and waited to get out. There's Dutch, Russian, US, Polish, in addition to several people here from Canada. I suppose this says Walter, not Witter. It's Harold, Minna, and Walter Atkinson, who were last living in Shanghai, but who were all Canadian citizens. Now, where should I start my search? Well, Ancestry's got an amazing new collection. It's less than a year old. It is the collection that is the result, or the beginnings of the collection that's the result of the collaboration between the Arolsen archives and Ancestry. And anybody can search this. It's at always remember, ancestry.com/cs/always remember. It's a free collection for searching. The bottom of the page looks like this, and there's two places that you can click on to be able to find records. So one of these is the list of displaced persons, passenger list, 1946 to 1971, that I was talking about before, and another is registers of people living in Germany that were persecuted from 1939 to 1947. I want to show you something here. These are three ships that left in 1948 bound for Canada. The SS General Langford in September 1948, the SS Marine Swallow leaving in August of 48, and the SS General Sturgis leaving in January of 1948. On the right side of the screen, and I know it's hard to read, the original copy that I have, or the copy of the original that I have, is also very difficult to read. The typewriter keys appear to have had some smudges on them. The paper probably wasn't well preserved through time, but it's referring to the General Langford. That's this ship leaving on September 21st, 1948. It says that it left Bremerhaven at 15:30 hours, that's at 3:30 p.m. local time, carrying 826 displaced persons for Canada. So this is also of a lot of value. I might want to go searching in various newspaper repositories to see if there was a report of a ship docking by that name, and see what they had to report. Sometimes they reported the names of the ships in these newspaper accounts, names of ship arrivals with the number of people on them, and it told sometimes where people were going, not necessarily by name, but numbers. 15 people went to Montreal, and 32 people headed west to Western Canada, and 20 people went south to the US, and 12 people went to Halifax. So it might have details like that. And then you can go looking in newspaper or other accounts that might be held in those local areas to see if you can find information about the people who arrived. Resources like newspapers.com are great for recording local newspapers and recording information about individuals. Now, this is an interesting database, and it's again part of that Arolsen group of records. This is an index of Jews whose German nationalities was annulled by Nazi regime from 1935 to 1944. And you'll notice that some of these men had the name Israel as a middle name, and some of the women had the name Sarah as a middle name. That's not because a lot of Jews used the name Israel as a middle name, although some Jews did. And you can see here where this guy was Max Moses, but he's got another name, Israel. Some Jewish women had the name Sarah and may have had the name Sarah as a middle name too. But there was a law that was passed that required Jews to identify themselves by including the middle name of Israel for men and Sarah for women. And it was enforced in various places at different times. So this is back to the search for people that were from those displaced persons lists. And here's another one of those lists that I was referring to before, the displaced persons lists. This is how to search the index of Jews whose German nationality was annulled by the Nazi regime. And this is part of another group of records, another collaborative effort. This is Ancestry with the United States National Archives. And you can see on the bottom of the page here that it says that it was indexed by Ancestry World Archives project contributors, and that it's part of the name index of Jews whose German nationality was annulled by the Nazi regime from the Berlin Documents Center, National Archives collection of foreign records seized. And this is how to search there. It gives you some information about browsing the collection. And this is a related collection, from the JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee, the American Joint Distribution Committee, and Ancestry also have some collaborative relationships. And these are some searches that you can do in those in those collections. Now, this record is the result, or part of the result, of a search that I was doing in the Arolsen archives. And the reason I pulled up this particular record, it wasn't what I was looking for, but it's got the name of somebody I was looking for on it, Therese Steininger. So I was looking for a Steininger family who I knew had emigrated from Europe to Australia. And I found this particular record. It's of a marriage of Therese Steininger to a Johann Szklarski. And this is part of the list of persecutees from the Arolsen archives. And that search you can see here. All Europe, registration of foreigners and German persecutees, 1939 to 1947, and all of the records that are part of the collaboration between the Arolsen archives and Ancestry will have this little marker on them. And if you scroll over here, you can learn more about the database. So you have the search routine up at the top and information about the source, as well as information about the database itself. Now I want to talk briefly about Yisker books, which are books of memories. They were created after the Holocaust by people who remembered their towns and people living in the towns. Yisker books are not something new. The first one was written in 1296 to commemorate the people who were killed during the First and Second Crusades. I have a list that I believe has been provided to you of the sources, or some of the sources that I like to consult when I'm doing this kind of research. I thank you all very much for joining me today. This is a tablecloth that was created by a survivor of the Holocaust, Diana Landsman Grass. She and her husband, Samuel Grass, and their son, Eugene Grass, all found themselves in Kazakhstan, and it was kind of accidental. Samuel was stationed there by the army. He was sent out there. He was a pharmacist, and he was sent there because to give support to the army. Diana was sent there as a favor from the mayor of the town that she lived in, whose wife she had befriended. And after the war, they returned to their original home in Stanislavov. then Poland, now Ivano-Frankivsk, Ukraine. And this is part of the collection of material that Diana, who was a celebrated seamstress with exhibitions in museums and in catalogs, had done. I have a close relationship with the descendants of Samuel and Diana. Samuel was my grandmother's brother. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon.